Hi, and welcome to your Lansing Connection. I'm Senator Nancy Cassis, and pleased to represent the 15th District that really encompasses most of western Oakland County. And as again today, we are here in Lansing taping our program for you. And we have two very fine, competent guests to introduce. Someone you may remember from a past Lansing Connection, but our topic today really is Michigan's economy, how it is affecting Michigan, our budget, and some of the things that we are doing to be proactive here in Michigan. What's working and what do we still need to do? All important questions to you as an individual, your family, and those that you work for or hope to work for. So let me introduce my two guests, and we will begin today. First, to my left is Howard Ryan. He's our senior policy, really our tax policy advisor, and an economist with the Senate Policy Division. And Howard and I work very, very closely together because I, of course, am chair of the Finance Committee in the Senate. And then David Zinn. This may be a new face to all of you. David is an economist with the Senate Fiscal Agency. And I'm going to lead off with David to tell us a little bit about your job with the fiscal agency and the fiscal agency in general. What is the role of the Senate Fiscal Agency?
Most broadly, the Senate Fiscal Agency functions as the staff for the Senate Appropriations Committee. That's the lion's share of the agency's operations. They work with the senators in preparing the budgets, not chair the subcommittees, but staff the subcommittees, and provide information related to formulating the budgets in the various budget areas. We also have a legal analysis division that performs analysis of all the bills, and two economists, myself and Jay Wortley, who, in addition to doing analysis on tax bills, work on preparing the agency's economic forecast for the consensus conference and that sort of stuff.
Well, it's very important stuff, isn't it? It really is the highlight, you might almost say, of what we do each spring. And without the kind of analytical abilities that you folks have, we would not be able to probably get the answers to the questions that we need. So almost every bill that comes before us, there's always the potential that there's an economic impact, and we get a featured memo regarding the bill itself and then its impact, and that's very, very helpful. And you've been helpful to me on a lot of occasions with a lot of different issues and questions. So we'll get to that in just a minute. And of course, Howard, as a Senate policy advisor, you do staff our Senate Finance Committee, but you have other responsibilities as well. Could you share them with our audience?
My job is really to the whole caucus and to make sure that that caucus members are being served in terms of particularly tax policy. So if they have a bill that wants to come to our committee, I'll work with them and their staff in developing the bill. Also, generally on economic issues, I'm asked from time to time to sort of help out with some of the things that fiscal does in terms of, for example, revenue sharing was something that I was quite involved with for a couple of years. Higher education, I staffed the higher education committees for 4 or 5 years, that sort of thing. So I would dabble in the budget, but nothing to the degree that the fiscal agency does. And then to kind of give an overall sense of the economy and that from time to time to members and those types of things, but sort of a general economic role.
And for me as a senator, very much involved in the fiscal side of things from the standpoint of tax policy. The interplay between all of us is very close, and in fact at times it can be intense because we're looking at public policy, trying to make decisions, but only decisions with backup and with good analysis and facts that will lead us to hopefully some good public policy. And Howard and I meet, just so my viewers know, we meet weekly. Usually every Tuesday afternoon we're looking at bills that have come to our committee or some work that I have started. And again, it's an extremely important role. Now, we also have a House fiscal agency, right, David?
Yes, and both the House Fiscal Agency and Senate Fiscal Agencies, they're nonpartisan, comparable roles in terms of, and more concerned with the expenditure side of the budget than the revenue, but they similarly have 2 economists on staff and a legislative analysis unit beyond the budget functions.
And then it's the House Fiscal Agency, the Senate Fiscal Agency, Treasury, our treasurer, Robert Klein, and some U of M, University of Michigan economists who just sat down recently. Tell us their function.
In terms of the consensus conference?
Yes, what that all means to our viewers.
Twice a year we are required by law and can meet more frequently if any of the what are called the principals request it. But yes, the House, Senate, and Treasury form a group that basically tries to forecast general fund and school aid fund revenues. And there's an initial forecast that's made in January that is usually the basis for the governor's budget. And then we essentially revisit that at the end of the spring in May when generally a lot of the budget work has been done. The governor's introduced her budget. Usually most of the bills have at least cleared one house. And then there's usually an agreement that's made, referred to as targets, where they adjust the revenue forecast for the May conference and then try to make the individual budgets fit within that agreement.
Well, that's a great segue into a discussion of what was the outcome of this all-important estimating conference, where we were in January and now where we are in May. And you made the important point that the governor proposes a budget back in February.
Yes.
And then there are House bills and Senate bills addressing the different departments and so on. And much that we're going to focus on, of course, is the general fund.
Yes.
And that, of course, refers to the revenue that's coming in from all our state taxes. That's where I come in. I mean, there's a real marriage, if you will, or should be, between the taxes and the revenue that are coming in and the economy that brings forward those taxes, and then the allocation or the appropriation of those funds over some 17 departments, correct?
Yes.
So at this point, the governor has proposed her legislative, well, really her budget for the fiscal 08-09 year.
Yes.
And now we are at a point of the legislature really disposing of that and finding compromise between House and Senate versions and setting targets. So let's just go back up. Let's back up just a touch here. Help us understand why an estimating conference is important and where we were last January and where we are now, and what that really forebodes for this next budget that we're in the midst of.
The genesis of the consensus conference, and a number of other states have adopted them for essentially the same reason, is to kind of separate the battle for how much revenue is going to come in from how do you spend it. Prior to most states having consensus processes, and the same was true for Michigan, you could have different people would have different assumptions about the economy, different assumptions about how much revenue would come in, and so the governor might present a budget that says, well, we expect the general fund to have $12 billion and here's how we're going to spend it, and the House might say, well, we only think there'll be $9 billion, and so there would be lots of conflict simply over how much money was coming in.